Proxy Forces by Matt Edsan. Narrated by Matt Edsan. Part 3. Chapter 17. Holuk's Taoiseach. Siobhan followed Lettrock and Gibson out of the room. The uniform had been a perfect fit for Lettrock. There would be no way for anyone to think Lettrock didn't belong on Holuk's. She found herself standing in a corridor that went in both directions. At either end were steps leading to the next level. Lettrock pointed to the right and she and Gibson began to follow him, passing other rooms on either side. Without his loyalists, the danger lurking behind finding Gibson's daughter had increased by tenfold. Siobhan didn't like the fact that they were flying blind. Once they reached the bottom of the steps, Lettrock turned to him. My loyalists said there are no guards outside the rooms where the scientists are being kept. I'll go up and check first. You both wait here. Siobhan exchanged glances with Gibson. The lack of guards didn't make much sense, unless the Toaxi in charge of Holuk's was so overconfident that the scientists couldn't escape even if they tried. She waited with Gibson for Lettrock to return. Gibson kept glancing back down the corridor. It made Siobhan nervous, but she dared not show it in front of her captain. She was still upset with herself for not carefully thinking through what to do after they had gotten to Captain Gibson. How many scientists were captured? Siobhan asked. Gibson shrugged. I wasn't told the exact number. I know what you're thinking. How are we going to get so many out of here? I don't have an answer for you yet. The odds of getting anyone else out of here were low. She hoped Captain Gibson understood that reality, but she decided to keep it to herself. Lettrock returned down the steps. There are no guards at the next level. I found a series of rooms. I assume those rooms are where the scientists are being held. Do you think they will be there now? Gibson asked. Lettrock glanced at him. I don't know. Lead the way, Gibson sighed. Siobhan could sense a tinge of desperation in his voice. In the short time she had spent with Captain Gibson as his XO, she had never encountered this side of the man. But, then again, this had to do with his own daughter. Siobhan had to cut him some slack. She grew up as an only child and her parents provided everything for her, until the day she chose a life they didn't approve of and abandoned her. Since then, Siobhan hadn't thought much about her parents. It was a difficult topic to broach. Pain and heartache were waiting for her whenever her mind wandered to anything about her family. Watching her captain's facial expressions, she sensed Gibson also had a complicated relationship with his family. She climbed the steps behind Lettrock and Captain Gibson. Except for the slight shuffling of their boots, dead silence greeted her at every step. Once they reached the top of the steps, she found herself staring at a large chamber with doors all around it. She presumed those doors led to rooms housing the scientists. Gibson pointed to the center of the chamber. What's that? It was only then that Siobhan noticed the pieces of metal and other fragments scattered on top of a few tables at the center. The weapon, maybe? Lettrock said. Gibson walked over and glanced at the pieces on the table. Siobhan joined him at his side. What do you see? Gibson asked. To Siobhan, it just looked like a random metal parts that could eventually become a weapon. But there was nothing distinctive about the parts. She was about to say something when some figures caught her eye. Her eyes widened as she realized who these parts belonged to. These are from the Poruk Empire, Siobhan whispered. During her training in the academy, there had been one module that covered the basics of the Poruk language. She had never thought of being able to use it until she had been assigned to keep an eye on Serli. During that time, she had spent a few hours studying about the Poruk Empire and its language. All of that and her training came back to her like a flood, and it also opened a host of new questions. What are these Poruk weapons parts doing here? Siobhan asked. I don't know, but I intend to find out, Gibson replied. Lettrock approached them. How do you want to proceed? We need to go one by one to each room and take a peek, Gibson said. Siobhan, keep guard while we move around. Siobhan was relieved to know that each room had a door with a small glass panel at the top. Gibson motioned to Letrock and the two of them walked over to the leftmost room in the chamber. She gripped her weapon and kept one eye on the steps while Gibson peered through the first glass panel. He shook his head and they moved on. She hoped they would move faster. Then Gibson stopped and pointed at the glass panel. Letrock motioned for Gibson to step back. Letrock opened the door and walked in. Gibson glanced in her direction. Siobhan nodded. She hoped this would work. Standing out here in the open was dangerous. Chapter 18, Holuk's Taoiseach. Gibson's heart was pounding. After discovering a few empty rooms, he had been anxious that Laura might not be in her room. But the moment he saw her through the glass panel, he exhaled a sigh of relief. It had been a few seconds since Letrock had stepped into the room. Gibson couldn't wait. He looked through the glass panel. Laura was in an aggressive posture against Letrock. Gibson had enough of this. He opened the door and slipped in. "Father, what are—" Laura said in confusion. Letrock interrupted her. "That's what I've been trying to tell you." "This Toaxi is helping me," Gibson remarked. "Letrock, you can stay outside." Letrock hesitated briefly before leaving the room. Laura folded her arms. "What are you doing here? You're going to get us all in trouble. I told you to wait for me to get you out." "My XO and the Toaxi got to my prison cell first," Gibson explained. "I couldn't wait for you." He didn't want to start another argument with his daughter. The last time he had spoken to her had been hurtful and destructive. But that had been following her mother's death. Laura seemed unconvinced. "You should have waited for my signal. What happens when the Toaxi find out you've escaped?" "We'll be long gone by then," Gibson replied. "What do you mean by we?" Laura demanded. "My shift will start soon. If I stay here too long, the Toaxi will come for me. You need to leave now." "I came to get you out of here," Gibson announced. "Didn't I tell you earlier that I cannot leave?" He had expected resistance from his daughter, but not like this. "But this is your chance," Gibson interjected. He didn't want to add that it may be his daughter's only chance to escape from Holuk's and the Toaxi. "My mother, your wife, is alive," Laura declared. "My staying is the only reason the Prionen will keep her alive. If I leave or escape, she is dead. Don't you understand that?" Gibson felt he had no choice but to reveal his feelings. "I don't believe your mother's alive. I think it's a trick by the Prionen species. They have deceived you to do their bidding." "You never fail to disappoint me again and again. I knew you wouldn't believe me. I hoped that you had changed, Father. After all these years, it looks like you haven't." Gibson needed to get his daughter to think straight. "The Prionen species is deceiving you. It's impossible for your mother to be alive. She and the rest were killed." "Why is it hard for you to believe me? Tell me why. Is it because I'm your daughter?" Gibson remained unfazed. "You're willing to trust your crew, commander, and even this Toaxi. But you won't trust your own daughter's words?" Her words cut through him like a knife. Gibson struggled to control his emotions. "I didn't mean it like that." Laura raised her voice. "Then what did you mean? I'm your family. Is this how you treat me after so many years? You haven't changed one bit." Before he could answer his daughter, she walked over to a cabinet, pulled out a device and passed it to him. "Since you won't believe your own daughter's words, take a look at this recording," Laura said. Gibson didn't have to ask anyone to know his daughter was fuming. He turned the device around in his hands. "What is it?" "Press the button," Laura sighed. Gibson clicked on it and a hologram appeared in front of him. In it, his eyes witnessed the impossible. His wife Leanne was standing around a few other people, talking with them. She then looked straight into the device and frowned before turning away. Leanne looked like she hadn't aged. She was the same as when Gibson had left her on the planet. And then the hologram stopped. He wiped the tears in his eyes as he continued to stare at her frozen image. How was it possible? If the Prionen species had fabricated this recording, it was near flawless. Was this another test by the Prionen species of their technology? He was confused. Laura grabbed the device from his hands and returned it to the cabinet. She then turned to him. If you won't believe me, will you at least believe that recording? Laura, I wasn't saying I didn't believe you, Gibson said. It's just a lot to... His daughter touched his hands. Father, I know it sounds incredible. I struggled with it too, but I believe it's true. I need your help to find my mother and rescue her. Laura apparently believed every word she was saying. The recording had confirmed to Laura that her mother was alive. I don't even know where to start looking. You are UHA captain, Laura countered. I know you can do this. Don't let me down again. This is our chance to find her. We thought we lost her before, but now we got a second chance. You have a second chance to save her. Please help me, Father. Desperation had found its home in every part of his daughter's eyes. He couldn't refuse her, and he wouldn't. If the recording was true, his wife was still out there somewhere. He had to find her. Gibson didn't know where he mustered the strength from. I'll find her and come back to get you. Laura walked over and hugged him. He patted her back in return. It felt good to hold his daughter again. As they separated, Laura's eyes were teary. Promise me that you will find my mother and come and get me. I promise, Gibson said. This was his last chance to fix the past and shut the door on all his regrets. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that his wife was really alive. He stopped to look at his grown-up daughter before leaving. She smiled at him as he slipped outside of the room. The hope in her eyes was unmistakable. He wouldn't let her down again. Chapter 19, Holuk's Taoiseach. We need to go now, Gibson said. My daughter cannot leave Holuk's. I'll explain later. Siobhan couldn't avoid the redness around her captain's eyes. He had been tearing, but she dared not ask what Gibson had meant by his daughter choosing to remain in Holuk's. Why would she do that? Letrock looked surprised. Your daughter isn't coming? No, Gibson sighed. We came all this way to get her, Letrock lamented. My loyalists died so that I could bring you to your daughter. And now you're telling me that she refuses to leave? Why would she choose to stay here? Siobhan shared in the Toaxi scavenger leader's frustration. They had risked a lot to get to this building and locate Gibson's daughter. But now, it seemed all that had been of no use. Gibson shook his head in dismay. I appreciate you helping us get here, but it's far more complicated than that. The Prionen are holding some other humans hostage in exchange for my daughter and the other scientists doing the work. If they leave, the hostages will be executed. You wouldn't understand, and I don't have the time to tell you everything. Siobhan began to get a clearer idea of what was going on. Where are these hostages being held? Gibson fixed his gaze on her. I wish I knew, but I'm going to find out. I suspect it's off-world. Siobhan thought Captain Gibson wasn't thinking straight. If the human hostages were being held off-world, they could be anywhere. How were they going to find these hostages? They didn't even have a vessel. She didn't know what had happened to the UHA Hornet, but it was unlikely they would be able to retrieve that vessel. She couldn't believe that during her first posting the vessel had been lost. We need to get out of here now, Gibson growled. Siobhan found it strange that Gibson's daughter had refused to leave with her father. There had to be more to the story than Captain Gibson was letting on. She wished he would tell her the whole story, but she didn't feel comfortable prying into his personal life. She hoped when the time was right that Captain Gibson would confide in her. Even during the short time on the UHA Hornet, she had discovered that Captain Gibson kept mostly to his quarters or the bridge without engaging with the crew. But now their journey to Taoiseach had uncovered links to his own family, and he wasn't going to be able to keep them a secret. Siobhan looked away as Letrock took charge. Follow me. She grabbed his shoulder. We need to find a vessel out of here. Letrock paused for a long moment. What you're asking of me is very dangerous. I already took a lot of risks bringing you here. I'm thankful for everything you've done, Siobhan said, but if you cannot leave Holux, we won't be able to get help for your group. I agree, Gibson nodded. We need to leave Holux. It's the only way. Letrock remained silent. Siobhan didn't know what the Toaxi scavenger leader was mulling in his head. If we return with you to the lattice, the Toaxi will come after us and attack your people, Siobhan insisted. Do you want your people to face another such attack? One thing I'm certain of is that we cannot go back there. But as I promised, I'll still help your people once we leave here. The Toaxi scavengers in the lattice couldn't afford another assault by the Toaxi in Holux. If Letrock took them back to the lattice, that would happen. Siobhan felt certain of it. Those families and young Toaxi children in the lattice had suffered enough. Once was enough, and none of it had been their fault. Letrock frowned. I'll take you to a landing pad. I hope one of you can fly a vessel. Siobhan smiled. That won't be a problem. Chapter 20. Medical Bay Prionen Vessel. Serli stood and stretched her body. It felt good to be standing and no longer strapped down. She twisted her arms and legs around. The last few hours had been painful. Serli turned to the female Prionen. Who are you? You can call me Kiri, the female Prionen smiled. Serli looked at her in confusion. That sounded like a Porukian name. I chose a name that's more familiar with your species, Kiri admitted. We've realized that familiarity helps bring down any potential anxiety in other species. So you don't have a name? Serli asked. We don't go by names, Kiri replied. I'm sure Praxat would have told you the same thing, but we don't have time to wait here. Praxat will be out for an hour of your time. I infused her with a neutralizer. That's sufficient for me to get you back to your dimension. Serli looked at her in confusion. Dimension? What was this female Prionen being talking about? What dimension? All this time Serli had suspected she was on a vessel far away from the neutral zone, but that appeared to be nowhere near the truth. Did you think we were anywhere near your neutral zone or the Toaxi homeworld? Kiri asked. Serli raised her hands in frustration. I thought, my species does not exist in your dimension, Kiri explained. Where we are now is in our dimension. It has planets, asteroid belts and other things like your one, but there are no Poruk humans nor other species you know of in this dimension. I know it sounds difficult to comprehend. Your species and others may not even realize that there are other dimensions out there, many other dimensions. Serli was beginning to understand how the Prionen species operated. It explained how their vessels were able to appear at will, attack a planet and leave. She suspected Tres knew about it but hadn't revealed it to her. Thinking of Tres, Serli felt her emotions beginning to arise, unchecked inside of her. She had to suppress it. Now wasn't the time to lose herself in what she had witnessed in her memories. There would be time later to deal with it. If she was in another dimension, then the transport technology the Prionen species was using was for interdimensional travel. The thought itself left Serli stunned. What else is in this dimension? Serli asked. You ask a lot of questions, Kiri replied. There are many other things in this dimension that you don't want to know about. Other species and dangers that lurk about. Every dimension is unique, just like your one. Serli was suspicious of this female Prionen. Was this a new deception? Was Kiri part of another way to get at whatever the Prionen species was searching for in her memories? Serli couldn't ignore that possibility. She had no reason to trust Kiri. I have a couple of more questions, Serli commented. What are you looking for in my memories? Serli always wanted to learn more. She felt there was so much truth out there in the universe, and that she hadn't even scratched the surface of it. Asking questions had helped her at the start of commanding her vessel. Despite lacking experience, she had made up for it by questioning everything and anything, often at the expense of others around her. Unfortunately, it had created expectations amongst the crew that she was a difficult person to hold a conversation with. Over time, her intense curiosity had become a hindrance to her with the crew. Now, finding herself in another dimension opened her eyes. to so many questions that she hadn't even considered possible. How many dimensions actually were there? How had the Prionen species developed the interdimensional transport technology? She had to admit that the answers to her questions may never satisfy her, but that didn't stop her from asking them. Kiri paused and stared at her. You mean you don't know? If there was something inserted into my memories, it was done without my knowledge. That's the only thing I know. Kiri kept looking at her. This explains what's going on. I hadn't understood everything until just now. The Prionen are searching for the locations of 1/3 of the supply chain for your galactic weapon. Serli looked baffled. 1/3? Kiri smiled in an awkward way. 3 Poruk individuals were chosen years ago by your leaders. This happened before your war with the humans. Each of these 3 chosen vessels were inserted with 1/3 of the locations of the planets involved in your galactic weapon supply chain. I believe your leaders felt it better to distribute the secret, and I must say it has been effective. The Prionen have been searching for the locations for a while. Everything clicked in place. Serli clenched her fist. The memory she had seen with Tress must have been at the point at which the locations were going to be implanted in her memories. Her fist remained curled up as anger began to manifest itself in her mind and then flow into her body. How dare Tress do such a thing to her? Serli had always trusted Tress, but apparently Tress had used her in the most horrible of ways. Tress had betrayed her when Serli had looked up to her for guidance. That revelation was still sinking into her mind. She tried to fight it. Maybe there was a reason for what she had just been told. I can see you're struggling with this news, but we cannot stay here any longer, Kiri said, as she grabbed Serli by the hand. We must leave this instant. Kiri opened the door and dragged Serli out of the space. Chapter 21, Holuk's T-Shock. Siobhan stood behind Letrock, who was standing at the topmost step right in front of a door. Captain Gibson was behind her, a few steps below. He had his weapon trained towards the lower steps. Letrock had managed to bring them to the top of a tower. He had told them that there was a landing pad on the tower. Siobhan didn't know how he knew of such information and how Letrock had been able to find a route that avoided the Toaxi guards. She suspected Letrock's loyalists were helping him. Letrock turned to her. When I open the door, there will be Toaxi guarding the vessel. You need to shoot them down with me. Siobhan nodded as she tightened her grip on the weapon. I'll hold the rear, Gibson murmured, in case we have any uninvited guests who try to come from down below. Letrock signaled, threw open the door and began firing his weapon without a second glance. Siobhan jumped out onto the roof of the tower and targeted the Toaxi guards. There were 4 of them. 2 of them had already collapsed when she fired her first burst of weapons fire. Her weapons fire hit the 3rd Toaxi guard in the chest and his body slumped onto the ground. Unfortunately, the 4th Toaxi guard managed to return fire. Siobhan rolled aside on the ground as Letrock took the last Toaxi guard down. Letrock waved to them. Quick, you need to go. I'll disappear now. Remember the proposal we agreed to. Siobhan touched his hand as Gibson raced past her into the Toaxi shuttle. I'll not forget everything you've done for us. We'll send help for your people. Letrock smiled, turned around, and darted down into the steps. Siobhan didn't know if he believed her words, but that was all she could offer at the moment. She herself needed to get away from T-Shock and get in contact with UHA before even she could send the Toaxi scavengers any help. The enormity of the task ahead didn't discourage her. She had to help Letrock. The Toaxi scavenger leader had risked his life for them. She promised herself she would return to help him, one way or another. Siobhan turned, rushed into the shuttle and closed the hatch. She strode to the cockpit of the Toaxi shuttle and found Captain Gibson drumming his fingers on the console. I was waiting, Gibson growled. I'm sorry, sir, Siobhan said as she sat down on the pilot's seat. Can you figure it out? Gibson asked. The tinge of doubt in his voice was as clear as the sky. Gibson was worried whether she could master the Toaxi controls. Siobhan opened the paper. Letrock gave me this. It should help. Letrock's a fine and resourceful leader, Gibson remarked. From the beginning, I think he had been ready to find us a way out. Captain Gibson was right. Although Lettrock hadn't discussed it before they had left the lattice, he had anticipated they would need to get to a vessel. That made it more urgent for Siobhan to keep to her part of the proposal. Siobhan pressed on the controls. The hum of the engines came alive. She exhaled a sigh of relief as the shuttle arose from the landing pad. She brought the shuttle about. "We got company," Gibson shouted. Siobhan gazed at the view screen. Two Toaxi guards had burst out through the same door. Her first thought was for Lettrock's safety. She hoped the Toaxi scavenger leader had made it away safely. "Engaging them," Siobhan said as she fired the cannons at them. Both Toaxi guards collapsed onto the ground. Siobhan pulled on the controls as the shuttle glided away from the tower and Holux. Red alerts began to wail all around her. "Hang on," Siobhan shouted. "We got weapons targeting us." The Toaxi shuttle banked hurriedly to the left as it dodged the weapons fire. She suspected these were from armed batteries positioned around Holux. A few moments later, they were streaking through the atmosphere. "Nicely done, Commander," Gibson commented, "but we aren't clear yet." The next battle would be against the orbital defenses around Taoiseach. She could only hope that the element of surprise would be to their advantage. Chapter 22, Orbit, Taoiseach. Gibson observed his XO as the Toaxi shuttle began to enter orbit. Commander Siobhan had come a long way in a short period of time. She had a determined look in her eyes as she steered the Toaxi shuttle. When he first met her, he had thought she wouldn't make it through the week. Space command was not for everyone. One needed to have a mind of steel to endure in space. Dealing with a crew and the unknown dangers lurking out there tended to take a mental toll on the best of captains and commanders. The burnout was real. He had seen good people leave UHA because of it, but Commander Siobhan had proved him wrong, and she kept doing it. Not only had she been able to muster the Toaxi to rescue him, but she had remained steadfast in her demeanor despite the pressure of being on enemy territory. For a new commander to be able to endure it was remarkable. He hoped to get a chance to mold her. She had the ingredients of being a future captain. "We are being hailed," Siobhan announced. Gibson had known it wouldn't be as simple to leave Toaxi space. "Open it." Siobhan pressed on the console and a voice spoke to them in Toaxi. Neither he nor Siobhan could understand a word of it. Gibson signaled for her to close the comms. "What do we do?" Siobhan asked. It was the first time he had heard a tremble in her voice. "Increase our speed," Gibson ordered. The Toaxi shuttle lurched forward. As it did, red alerts began to appear all along the console dashboard. "Missiles incoming," Siobhan announced, deploying countermeasures. The Toaxi shuttle continued to race forward. Gibson sensed that his XO was trying to extract every ounce of thrust from the engines, but there were no shudders rolling through the shuttle. He could only assume his XO had successfully evaded the missiles. "We are clear of Taoiseach," Siobhan admitted. "That's strange." "I know what you mean," Gibson agreed. "Where are the Toaxi vessels that patrol their homeworld? How come we didn't encounter any of them?" It bothered him, to a greater extent than he would like to admit. If the Toaxi vessels weren't around Taoiseach, it meant they were somewhere else. What were the Toaxi up to? More importantly, what were the Prionen getting the Toaxi to do? "Where do we head from here?" Siobhan asked. "Bring up a star chart of this part of space," Gibson said. A holographic star chart appeared. However, it had Toaxi symbols all over it. Gibson pointed at the right of the star chart. "What's that?" His XO looked at it. "It's too small to be a planet. It could be an outpost." "Like a Guti one that was destroyed?" "Possible, sir." Gibson didn't know if that outpost was even still there, but they had to take a risk. "Lay a route to that position," Gibson ordered. "Affirmative." "Captain, what about the UHA Hornet?" Gibson had also been thinking about his vessel. He doubted they would be able to retrieve it. Not for now. "What about it?" Gibson asked. "Do you think the Toaxi destroyed it?" Siobhan asked. "The Toaxi fleet isn't as large as ours or that of the Poruk," Gibson commented. "I don't think the Toaxi would destroy it. I figured they would add it to their fleet." Gibson doubted the Toaxi could helm the UHA Hornet, but with help from the Prionen species, anything was possible. Speaking of the Poruk, I don't know where Serli went, Siobhan remarked. There has been no sighting of her ever since she was taken at the lattice. Gibson grunted. The Poruk captain was the least of his problems. He didn't care where she had disappeared to. He was more upset that he had lost his entire crew. During the entire Pinnacle War, he never lost a vessel or crew. Even in the worst of times in the war, he and his crew had survived and come through. But this was different. They had been ambushed. Serli would be just another casualty. Imperial Command wouldn't be happy that he lost their captain. But the situation with the Prionen species was bigger than both UHA and the Poruk Empire. He needed to update Rear Admiral Hutchinson as soon as possible. But not now. It was too risky to send any transmissions. Their transmissions could be intercepted. So much was unknown about the Prionen species. They could be lurking out there and appear in an instant. Gibson would wait until they reached the outpost. Then he had a promise to keep to his daughter, and he was going to keep it. Chapter 23, Toaxi Shuttle Neutral Zone. Siobhan checked the route. They were 30 minutes away from the outpost. She hoped it was an outpost that was still functioning. She recalled how the Prionen had destroyed the Guti outpost. Captain, what of the crew? Siobhan asked. The crew's dead, Gibson replied. That much the Toaxi confirmed with me. We are all that is left of the UHA Hornet. Siobhan shuddered at his words. She was at a loss for words. How could so many people be dead? She hadn't even had a chance to build relationships with her crew, and now they were gone. She felt guilty. Ever since she had joined the crew, she had been focused on proving herself. She hadn't cared at all for the crew and their perspective. It had been a foolish endeavor. Her need to be accepted had overshadowed her duties. Now, none of that mattered. I have a visual on the outpost, Siobhan announced. The view screen changed to reveal an outpost in the distance. Magnify it, Gibson said. The view screen expanded to reveal an outpost. It was bigger than she had expected. Looks like it hasn't been destroyed, Gibson remarked. Is this another Guti outpost? Siobhan asked. I don't think so. Not every outpost belongs to the Guti in this region of space. Some are neutral outposts that serve all species. A wave of relief swept Siobhan. She was glad that they would be able to dock at the outpost. Traveling alone in this Toaxi shuttle was dangerous. They were too exposed to any vessels, and the Toaxi shuttle wasn't as heavily armed as those on the UHA Hornet. A while later, Siobhan brought the shuttle into a docking port alongside the outpost. No questions had been asked by the outpost when they had neared it. Siobhan could only deduce that the outpost permitted any vessels to dock with it. Gibson had asked to scan the other vessels at the outpost. Fortunately, there had been none that belonged to the Toaxi. Once the docking clamps closed on the Toaxi shuttle, Gibson turned to her. I need to find a way to send a transmission to Rear Admiral Hutchinson. Do you want me to stay here? Siobhan inquired. No, we stay together, Gibson replied. I don't plan to use this shuttle any longer. The Toaxi may continue to search for it. We need to find a different transport out of here. Siobhan checked her weapon as they walked out through the airlock and into the outpost. The platform corridor was surprisingly empty, although she had observed multiple vessels docked around her. She followed Gibson down the corridor and into a large atrium. The outpost had multiple levels. It didn't seem to belong to the Guti. In fact, Siobhan didn't know who the outpost belonged to. During her transmissions to dock, there had been no welcome announcements concerning the outpost. The individual on the other hand had sounded more like a robot than anything else. The atrium wasn't teeming with people. However, she noticed several figures mulling about near some shops on the other end of the atrium. Being her first visit to an outpost, she had heard stories of these outposts, especially the ones in the neutral zone, being filled with species from all over the neighboring systems. But this place was unusually quiet. Siobhan tried to keep up with Gibson as he strode over to the nearest shop. The owner, a humanoid alien, turned towards them. "It's about time I met a human. You're my first human customer. Welcome to the Runem outpost. What may I help you with?" The shop had shelves full of devices and mechanical parts. "I'm looking for a communication shop where I can send a transmission," Gibson said. The shop owner frowned. "On the second level. Where have you come from?" "Taoiseach," Siobhan replied a bit too quickly. One glance by Captain Gibson and she realized she had revealed too much information. The shop owner's eyes widened. "The Toaxi homeworld? You're lucky to be away from that place." Gibson stared at the shop owner. "Why do you say that?" "Haven't you heard?" the shop owner replied. "The Toaxi have begun attacking their neighbors. This atrium is always full of people looking to buy things. But ever since news of the orbital bombardment reached us, fewer people want to shop or even visit this outpost. They fear getting dragged into the middle of the Toaxi attack." "But this outpost is safe?" Gibson asked. "It's a distance from the Toaxi space," the shop owner said. "But we are the closest outpost to the Toaxi. I think many people are naturally nervous. It's so unlike the Toaxi to launch an attack. But things have been changing with them recently." "What things?" Siobhan asked. Gibson shot her a glance. "Thank you for your help, but we need to get going. If we need anything, we'll return to your shop." The shop owner grunted and turned away. As Siobhan followed Gibson to the nearest lift, he turned to her. "Try not to say too many things." "I'm sorry, sir," Siobhan said. "The bombardment explains why we didn't encounter the Toaxi patrols in orbit," Gibson murmured. "They must have been redeployed as part of the attack." "Why would the Toaxi start a new war?" Siobhan asked. "I don't think it's the Toaxi species that's calling the shots," Gibson said as they stepped into the lift. Chapter 24. Runem Outpost Neutral Zone. The lift doors opened. Gibson slipped out of the lift, followed by his XO. He had been annoyed with her for revealing too much information to the shop owner. However, it had also led them to find out about the Toaxi's current strategy. The Toaxi species weren't so stupid to attack their neighbors, not unless they had the backing of a more powerful species. The Prionen species must have ordered the Toaxi to attack their neighbors. Gibson didn't yet understand the rationale behind the attack. However, his XO had been correct that a new war was at its infancy stage. Gibson suppressed a sigh, knowing what was ahead for all species. Gibson glanced around the second level of the atrium. There were more shops lined around the four sides of this level. More people were seen to be mulling around. He noticed that Siobhan was gawking at all the different alien species walking about. He was sure she had never before seen so many species in a single atrium. Gibson pointed to the right. "Over there is the shop. You wait outside the shop and keep your eyes open for anything suspicious. And do not talk with anyone until I'm back." He didn't want his XO to be in awe of the aliens walking around and reveal anything to them. Despite being away from Toaxi space, the dangers were ever present. "Yes, sir," Siobhan nodded. Gibson strode to the right and walked into the shop. It had smaller glass-encased rooms with devices inside of them. The gouty shop owner walked up to him. "Do you need to send a transmission?" Gibson nodded and was ushered into the nearest small room. Once the door was shut, he sat down and clicked on the device. He found the option to open a connection to UHA. He clicked on it and waited. Then the UHA insignia of gold wings on a white circle appeared on the screen in front of him. Gibson entered his UHA credentials. The insignia was soon replaced with an image of Rear Admiral Hutchinson. "Gibson, is that you?" Hutchinson asked in disbelief. "What the heck happened to you? I haven't heard from you in several days." Gibson quickly briefed Hutchinson on everything that had transpired since his last communication. He intentionally avoided talking about meeting his daughter and discovering that his wife was alive. That wasn't important for the moment. Hutchinson listened carefully without interrupting him. "Are you sure the UHA Hornet and his crew are lost?" Hutchinson asked. "Yes, sir," Gibson nodded. "Only I and my XO remain alive. What about the Poruk Captain? Hutchinson asked. Gibson struggled to control himself. Hutchinson was acting like a typical bureaucrat, showing concern for the Poruk Captain when he had just announced that an entire UHA crew had been killed in battle. Her whereabouts are unknown, Gibson replied. According to my EXO, Serli was captured by the Prionen. Why do they want her? I don't know. Hutchinson put his hands to his head. Gibson realized the Rear Admiral was more anxious about the loss of the Poruk Captain. Could he also show a bit more concern for human lives? It wasn't Gibson's fault that Serli had been captured. None of them had been able to predict that they had been traveling into a perfectly orchestrated trap. Sir, the Prionen species are using the scientists to build a weapon, but that's as much information as I could gather, Gibson commented. I observed that some of their work included modifying Poruk weapons. Hutchinson raised his eyebrows. Poruk weapons, are you certain of it? Yes, sir, Gibson replied. His next question caught Gibson by surprise. Did you find Laura? Gibson had hoped to avoid talking about her. Yes, she is among the scientists that are being held hostage with the threat of killing other humans if they leave. She and the rest of the scientists chose not to leave with us. That was far from the truth. He had been selfish, only focusing on rescuing his own daughter. He hadn't cared for the rest of the scientists or their whereabouts. In fact, the other scientists may have wanted to leave. It was too late to second-guess his decisions. Hutchinson paused for a long moment. Where does the Prionen species come from? Are we able to find the location of their homeworld? Gibson clenched his fist as he realized that Hutchinson had ignored the information about his daughter and the scientists. It was as he had suspected. Hutchinson had no interest in saving his daughter nor the scientists. Laura had been the lure to get him to command the mission. To Hutchinson, the scientists were expendable. We are unable to confirm that, Gibson replied. What about this Toaxi city that appeared from nowhere? Hutchinson asked. Are you telling me that the Prionen brought it over? We must consider that possibility, Gibson replied. If they are able to transport an entire city, that would require a tremendous source of energy, Hutchinson mused. Gibson nodded. Hutchinson's face approached the screen. I need you to gather more intelligence on the Prionen species and this technology. I'll update UHA on everything that you shared and get us ready. I don't have a vessel, Gibson insisted. Hutchinson ignored his plight. I'll transfer you the necessary funds. Use that to get a vessel or find passage on one. I need you to gather more intelligence. Once we find the Prionen homeworld, UHA will launch an attack. It's imperative that the Prionen face a reckoning. What about the Toaxi attacking their neighbors? What about it? Shouldn't we do something? They killed our crew and now are attacking other innocent species. We'll not engage the Toaxi, not yet. Let me be clear about it. The UHA doesn't want to be dragged into another war. The Toaxi species are a smaller species. Is that clear? Yes, sir, Gibson replied as the communication ended. Gibson frowned as he stood and paid the shop owner for the use of the communications device. Rear Admiral Hutchinson either didn't get it, or he was unwilling to face the truth. The Prionen species were behind the new boldness of the Toaxi species. The Rear Admiral was hoping this new escalation of hostilities between the Toaxi species and its neighbors wouldn't embroil the UHA. Gibson was irritated that Hutchinson was pushing him to find more intelligence without a ship or crew. What did Hutchinson expect from him? Despite that, Gibson would forge ahead, not to appease UHA, but for the sake of his family. But he couldn't do it alone. Part 3, The End.